Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. The South Carolina Ports Authority, a major economic driver in South Carolina, supporting 187,000 jobs and nearly $53 billion in annual economic activity. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
This may sound counterintuitive and maybe even antithetical, but politics may be the easiest part of being governor. Not because I know from personal experience, but at least you know in politics that you'll face stark differences in principles and policies. The harder part is being a governor of all the people and rising to a position of convening honest, fair, and productive dialogue. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business, policy, and public affairs. On this special executive profile, North Carolina's former Attorney General and now the Old North State's 75th governor, the Honorable Roy Cooper.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. BARINGS, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, an executive profile featuring North Carolina's Governor, Roy Cooper.
Welcome back. Governor, happy summer, and thank you for taking time to be on the program.
Delighted, Chris. You do such a great job in informing people in North Carolina about what's happening in the economy, and grateful to be here with you.
So, Governor, I know we got through a budget cycle recently, and since you were in office, there have been reports about people saying, well, the governor and the General Assembly, they're just not getting together. There's gossip about it. There are reports about it. Let's ask the source. How would you characterize your relationship with the General Assembly and those that might be on the other side of an argument?
Well, first, I've worked hard to achieve common ground. My entire public service has been built on finding consensus. And, with the current leadership in place, we have found some consensus on a number of issues, one being the repeal of House Bill 2. I think that has been the right thing for our state. I wanted it to go further, and we still have some work to do, but that was a positive achievement. Then we've also had some agreements about economic incentives, particularly those that can help bring transformational economic development projects in North Carolina. This legislature had not been there a few years ago, and we lost out on a number of wins that our state could have gotten with companies that could have brought better paying jobs to our state. And I think now they are on track with that, and we have worked together to attract some good businesses to North Carolina and have a lot of lines in the water right now of companies that we think may be coming here. But we have had fundamental disagreements on the amount of investment that we should make in public education, training our workforce. We are in a race with innovation, and if we don't make sure that we're up to date with training our workforce and creating the kind of workforce that attracts these jobs, it's going to be a problem. We've had fundamental disagreements on health care, and particularly closing this health insurance gap for the people of North Carolina. And going forward, we've had some fundamental disagreements on tax policy. They continue to want to reduce corporate tax, even though North Carolina has the lowest corporate tax of any state in the country that has a corporate tax. I believe we need to instead now invest in education, and I'm talking cradle to career, early childhood, pre-K, K through 12, community colleges and universities. We have some of the best higher education in the country, if not the best, but we have to maintain that investment. Now, I have some concerns about our state going forward unless we're willing to make those investments and find the money to do it.
Does the way the General Assembly has approached the idea of economic development in the last few years, that as you described it through the idea that they have been more conservative fiscally, has created a surplus from year to year in budget, does that give the opportunity for economic development incentives to be much richer when you get to the table and start selling the idea of North Carolina to these folks?
Well, first, I really don't want to debate what has been done on taxes in North Carolina. We can have arguments about that. You know, a lot of our success is due to the foundation that's been built over the decades of leaders in North Carolina, both in public and private life and in our education institutions, who had the foresight to build a great community system, university system and community college system, who understood the importance of investment in education, who understood innovations like the Research Triangle Park and the financial world that's been built here in Charlotte. Over the last few years, we have seen a significant reduction in income tax. We've also seen a significant reduction in corporate tax. I believe for state economic prosperity, that targeted incentives and targeted tax cuts for businesses that are going to show verifiable job creation are better than across-the-board cuts, particularly right now when we're coming to a time when investments in education are really demanding, when Congress has just passed a budget and a tax plan, when they say they're not going to touch Social Security, they're not going to touch Medicare, they're going to increase military spending. We know what's going to happen. More responsibility is going to fall back on the states for education, transportation, and health care. So we need to make sure we are ready to make those investments that all of our people, including our businesses, are going to expect out of the state. And I don't want us to end up like some of these Midwestern states who are having to go to school 4 days a week because they have cut themselves into a position with their state budgets that they can't afford the investment.
Does education need to get to a point where you would be satisfied with progress in North Carolina? And I mean K through 12, Your Honor, but also higher education. Is the answer more money in a budget? Is it a different policy? How do you see us getting back to that?
It's both. We have to demand accountability in our public schools, and we have to understand that we're in this race with innovation that I talked about. So the job markets are changing, the skills that are needed are changing, the different kinds of jobs that are out there are changing. So education has to be nimble and ready to create the workforce of the future. So we have to find the right ways to demand accountability. But as a practical matter, we're falling back in per pupil investment in public education. We now rank 39th in the country in per pupil expenditure. We rank 37th in teacher pay. So we're falling behind. So yes, we need a greater investment in our public schools. And I've been proud of the teachers who are standing up. Most of them talk to me about outcomes and not incomes. They care about what happens to their students, and they're advocating for more investment in public schools. You know, more textbooks, better school safety, higher per pupil expenditure, and yes, teacher salaries that show that we respect this profession. So we have a lot of work to do in education, and I'm concerned that this General Assembly has not paid attention to it and has relied on our past successes. We have to be building for the future, and I believe that we're going to probably have a little different General Assembly after these November elections, one that I think will see more balance and one that I think we can build consensus for the future, which I think the people want us to do. The people want us to quit the partisan fighting. They want us to get together and try to find a way forward, evidence-based, fact-based policy, making sure that we are accountable to the taxpayers with fiscally responsible moves. I'm ready to do that.
What do you think the effect of thousands of teachers protesting back in May had, besides, and I don't mean to minimize this, sir, but besides It looked good in the paper, it looked good in the media, and they obviously said some things and communicated their passion. What do you think the long-lasting effect of that?
So I believe the budget of this General Assembly has been better than it would have been, but for the challenging budget that I put forward and constantly compared what we were doing to that budget, and people coming to the General Assembly and saying, we have to invest more in public education. I think they fell woefully short, but I believe that they did more, particularly over the last couple of years, than they had intended to do, but for the public outcry, but for the budgets that I have put forward that have been challenging to them and have shown them the path of what we need to do in investments in education across the board. Early childhood, there was a big disappointment in this budget with $50 million that could have gone to strengthen and expand our early childhood education that they used just to fill the budget gap. And thousands and thousands of children are going to miss out because of that decision. So I think that we need to do better when it comes to education, because that's the key to the workforce. There's a reason that top CEOs, particularly in the technology world, were over at the General Assembly advocating for increases in pre-K, because they know that there's a big difference in the kids who've had pre-K and kids who haven't. You just talk to any kindergarten teacher who can tell you the difference between kids that have had pre-K and who haven't.
And not to put words in your mouth, but you're referring to a lot of the CEOs across the state that say, if we can measure third grade reading scores and increase that.
Sure, absolutely. Third grade reading scores are crucial, but it begins when kids aren't even verbal yet. The number of words they hear in no matter what language helps them to develop their brains. It's scientifically verifiable that investments early in a kid's life can help increase their learning capacity and their success later on. And we need to be making those investments. My good friend Governor Hunt, who calls me from time to time and is still very active at age 80, he started Smart Start. I helped him when I was in the General Assembly, helped put this together, public-private partnership, putting together people who can help these kids at an early age. And it's challenging, but it's something our state has to do.
I know you know this well, and I say this for benefit of our viewers, that two of the biggest priorities in the state usually come down to education, transportation, infrastructure. Your secretary, a member of your cabinet, Jim Trogdon, was on this program talking about that particular investment and deploying not just the Build NC bond and the plan, but making sure that we find a new way to approach accelerating transportation infrastructure. So let's start with the Build NC bond. The Build NC bond is now reality and will be deployed and will be used. Some people.
Well, I got to sign it first, but I will.
Right. Yes, sir. And I assume that you're leaning toward that. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have gotten way out in front of that.
No, that's okay. This is going to be aired 3 weeks from now, so it will be law by then.
Well,
so
but thank you. And you know, it's important to say that we are taping this program mid-June, and you're most likely seeing this mid-July. Why wasn't it more of a public referendum? And will that cost more to not have it a public referendum? But beyond that, how do you leverage $3 billion over a short period of time to get that to work quickly?
So one of the problems that you have in highway construction and transportation, public transportation construction, is that you have boom and bust times, and you get if the state gets money to invest, you get a company that hires their people and gets geared up, but then the number of projects go down like this, and then they have to gear back down again. But what the bond is supposed to do is to keep it at a more level pace where these companies can gear up with their employment, be ready to do the next job. And we think that saves money in the long run because you can get better bids on projects and you can leverage the financing of this money. This is not a big bond project all at once. It's something meant to be done in a systematic way to even out how we do our construction and make it more cost efficient for our state and for the people who are paying the road taxes.
I look at the part of the Charlotte region, North Mecklenburg, Anson counties, Iredell County, Mecklenburg County, Stanley County, that have I-77 running through there, and there's been a big debate around how to best pay for that. It was agreed upon a few years ago about having a Spanish vendor, Sintra, manage that contract, but there continues to be pushback on that. Governor, what is the best way forward to satisfy opponents of that particular agreement, but also not slow down the widening of a very critical artery in the central part of North Carolina?
Public input and early public input in the process about how we finance roads and what the terms of that are.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Does it change the way then going forward?
No, I think one of the big problems with this I-77 Sintra contract is that the public knew very little about it until there was a contract that was entered into. That I think if the public had put their stamp on this and had they been involved in this, they would have said, no, this is not the right way to do it. What our secretary has done is begun to bring all of those people to the table over the last few months. There have been numerous meetings about what works for the locals when you're talking about tolling roads. How can we make sure that we can finance this road project? And I think the secretary will come up with a solution to this problem that is the result of input. So yeah, I think the future is still, we've got to use all options on the table to finance transportation and to make sure that we're keeping up with repair. We have challenges with our roads and bridges across the state, and we know our urban areas need help in making decisions about public transportation. We know a lot of the companies that we're talking to about bringing them into North Carolina, particularly in our urban areas, want some type of public transportation for their employees.
You know, you had mentioned before the idea that the conversation we're having now might very well have some other issues that have happened and taken place because of the lag between when we're taping it and when it's actually broadcast. I think and this is my term, sir, one of the worst kept secrets in economic development is an Apple idea of moving to North Carolina. I know Tim Cook, CEO, has talked to you. I know he's a Duke alum, and there seem to be a lot of indicators to say that Apple will most likely choose the Old North State. Not to say yes or no, because I think given the timing of this broadcast, but what do you think it is about Apple or companies like Apple or the miss for Amazon, even though the triangle is still in the hunt? How do we need to think differently? And what do you say about North Carolina when you're talking to these progressive, forward-looking companies?
Well, first, it's workforce and talent. That is the number one issue from the CEOs that I talk to that they want. And they're not going to come here unless they can feel relatively sure that they will have access to the talent and workforce. And that's a constant effort by our universities, by our community colleges, even by our high schools. We have to be very nimble. We have to be ready with customized training. That has to be the number one thing for sure. Then you look at the research institutions of our universities, particularly if it's an innovative firm. You know, we're recruiting right now, and maybe by this time this show airs, we'll know about the Army Futures Command, which is looking at North Carolina to cite that new effort. They want to make sure that they've got access to universities and to community colleges. But the quality of life, the lower cost of living, the lower cost of doing business, all of those good things I talk about. But I also talk about the diversity of our state. We have more historically black colleges and universities than any state in the country. In the technology end, we have, by proportion, more women in higher percentage of women in the tech workforce than any other state. And we tell these companies that North Carolina is an open, welcoming, diverse state that wants to provide you with a diverse workforce that is highly skilled and talented. And we have a great product to sell, Chris. We have the best state in the country. And I've lived here all my life. I know the kind of people who live here, but I know the kind of people we're attracting. We're growing by about the city of High Point, 115,000 or so people a year, people who are coming into North Carolina choosing our state. You talk to military generals who have come to Fort Bragg and then served all over the country. They come back to North Carolina, some of them to this area, some to Pinehurst, some to the mountains, some to the coast. We have the place that people want to be. And as long as we can keep up that workforce and our investment in education, we won't even talk about, well, we may talk about it later, but bridging the rural-urban divide, making sure we get high-speed internet access to our rural areas, making sure we incentivize and encourage a strong innovation and entrepreneur economy in our state. I think we have, for example, in bio, I was up in Boston a couple of weeks ago at the bio conference. We're a place where people are coming for advanced manufacturing in the bio area with precision health and gene therapy. We're a place where all of this can happen. So there are exciting times ahead. As a state, however, we need to continue to invest in our education, in our infrastructure, to make sure that we're the kind of place that they continue to want to come.
So you, as you just talked about the rural-urban divide, as you yourself have DNA in Nashville and down east, help us understand the idea of the rural-urban divide, and that it's different now, and it's we've always had it, but now why is it maybe more acute than it ever has been before?
I think people are flocking to the urban areas in unprecedented numbers.
Would you say it's almost uber urban?
You know, we used to be a state that was spread out, and you really couldn't pinpoint particular strong metropolitan urban areas. You can now, and they are across our state, and a number of these counties that we're talking about in the rural areas are losing population, and they're also frustrating in that a lot of their talented young people, after they get their education, don't choose to go back to these counties. They choose to move to an urban area. And one of the things we cannot fall into the trap of making this urban-rural issue a zero-sum game. And I worry about the legislature sometimes. You feel like you have to take from one side and give to the other. And it is about a rising tide floating all boats, and working on interchange between the two, making sure that we get broadband internet access to these areas, because that's how these small businesses are going to thrive. And selling our rural areas. For example, we've been able to sell companies across the globe on advanced manufacturing in rural areas.
For instance, what part of the state?
Well, in the eastern, for example, we attracted Triangle Tire to Edgecombe County in North Carolina. This was their first manufacturing plant outside of China, but they have advanced manufacturing you just would not believe. They make these large industrial tires, 800 jobs. They're a number of companies across North Carolina that have come into the rural areas, mid-sized companies that like the fact that our community colleges are so ready to help them train the workforce that they need. And there's a lot of advantages to living in these rural areas. There's a lower cost of living. There's a little bit easier pace of life. There's more space. You can buy a lot more house. And people like living in rural counties. So it's not for some people, but we need to continue to sell that because it is a great strength of our state.
And one more quick question on that. So Triangle Tires picks Edgecombe County. Did it ever, even in the back of your mind, Governor, did you say, you know, we're so glad you did, but now I'm thinking about a shortage of the talent that you need. How are we going to find those to take the jobs?
Well, we committed to them that we're going to make sure that they have the workforce, and there's going to be a training center built, Edgecombe Community College. The Golden Leaf Foundation helped with that. We've got a lot of efforts that revolve around workforce in our economic recruitment, because like I say, that's the number one issue with most of these companies.
We've got about a minute and a half left, and it seems like the comment, this doesn't even say it, but the phrase Medicaid expansion's coming back up to some degree is Is now the time? In
Absolutely.
Less than a minute.
3 years ago was the time, Chris. So I've spent time at chambers of commerce across this state, pushing aside the moral or social issues about health care for people, and I tell them this is a business decision. What you're talking about here is taxpayer money that we've already paid to Washington from North Carolina, where we could get back about $4 billion a year, where we could cover 600,000 people and help control health insurance costs for businesses, because you reduce the indigent population that's been shown in other states, and creating 40,000 healthcare jobs. And I got the CEOs to agree to cover the state portion
so in a word,
of the hospital.
Are they more sympathetic? Are they more sympathetic? In about 5 seconds.
Probably not. I think it's going to take November elections.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for being on the program. Thank you for joining us. Until next week. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by the Duke Endowment, BARINGS, Grant Thornton, the South Carolina Ports Authority, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.